Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. So just quickly before I get into this episode, I've been kind of going back and buying like older games that were on sale and stuff. And a while back I bought like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. So I've been going back and playing those, and I just beat Resident Evil 2. I just played through Leon's story. I might play through Claire's story next, but I mean, I've seen like Let's Plays of it, so I pretty much know what happens in both gameplay or in both stories. So, but yeah, I mean, it was really good. I get the hype for it. This isn't going to be a full-fledged review. That game came out in 2019? Yeah, January 25th, 2019. But well, then again, I did a review of East 8, and that game came out a few years ago, I think. So, but yeah, I mean, I liked it a lot. It was really fun. I've actually, full disclosure, I've actually never played a Resident Evil game, at least not from beginning to end. This is going to really date me, but I played the original Resident Evil 2 for the PlayStation 1 when I rented it from Blockbuster way back in the day. So yeah, I'll just let that sink in. I thought I saw an article somewhere saying that Blockbuster might be making a resurgence. Man, that would be awesome. I'd love to see those guys come back. I think they got like, one place left in Oregon or something like that? I think so. But anyways, yeah, I played that game. I thought it was a lot of fun. Definitely creepy. I got more used to the atmosphere as time went on. I actually had to brighten the game in a few spots just because I felt like, I don't know if it was just my TV, but like, it seemed like there were a few scenes like where even with like the lights on or the flashlight on, and when you're going down dark corridors, it was kind of hard to see what was going on, which kind of got a little annoying when I needed to like run away or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of funny. Like at first it was really creepy, but you get used to it after a while. Like at first the zombies were scary, but then they didn't bother me. Then like when Mr. X shows up, he's kind of creepy, but then he becomes more of just kind of a pain in the ass later, because it's just like I'm trying to solve puzzles and he's just like trying to bash my head in. So like, yeah, I get the hype that it's gotten. I didn't play all of the original, so I can't really compare it to that one. I don't really know as far as like changes they've made and stuff like that, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. I don't remember how much I paid for it, but I want to say I got it and the Resident Evil 3 remake for like together for like around $40, I want to say. So I didn't quite pay full price for it. And I think my game time on Leon's story was around 6-7 hours on the normal difficulty. So I don't know how good that is. My rank was like B. I think I had like 44 saves or something like that. So, but yeah, I mean, I'll probably go back and play it again at some point. I'll probably play through Claire's story, and then maybe do Hunk's story, the other survivor, at some point. But I liked it, and it's kind of gotten me interested in other Resident Evil games too. I know the Resident Evil 4 remake is coming out tomorrow at the time of this recording, so I'm curious about that one. Again, never played the original on the GameCube and the PS2, I think it was on, but I know it's considered by a lot of people to be like one of the best Resident Evil games. So I'm curious about that one. I might hold off on it until it goes on sale. I don't know if I'm going to buy it day one, mainly because I have a lot of games in my backlog I got to get through. Like, I got to get through the other Resident Evil games. I've still got to play through 7 and 8. I may do a review on those games at some point. I know they've been out for a while, but I don't know. I might give my thoughts on those. Maybe not like a full-fledged review like what I normally do, but maybe just kind of give my brief overall thoughts on those. But yeah, just want to give a brief summary of that game and kind of my feelings towards it. I liked it. If you haven't played it yet and you like horror games, check it out. But today I wanted to talk about, I said last time that I would try to do more reviews on books. So here we are. I'm a man of my word. I have my review for Fairy Tale by Stephen King. The book came out, it was released September 6th of 2022, so a few months back. This was a book that I discovered just kind of by accident when I was walking through Walmart one night. I was kind of just, doing some grocery shopping and just I walked through their very small book section of the one by where I live, and just happened to see the there was only one Stephen King book on the shelf, and that's kind of how I found it. I like the design of the book too. It's got it's like a blue cover, and it almost kind of looks like the way it's designed on there. It's like it's tiles because it's supposed to be like a well going down. But the way it almost looks like an eyeball, like a dragon eye or something like that. So I thought that was kind of cool, just the design of it. I don't know if that was on purpose or if it was just a coincidence, but I'd like to think that it was, just because it's kind of got it's got like that fairy tale vibe to it. So I think my understanding was the backstory on this was Stephen King, I think, wrote this during the pandemic, because I think he had said in an interview that he was working on his next novel, and he was just trying to think of something that would be interesting and kind of fun for people to read, and this was the idea that kind of came to him. So I thought that was interesting. One thing I like about this book too that I think kind of is a little bit different from what he normally does with his novels is there's illustrations in it, which they kind of remind me back of like the old like Harry Potter novels and books like that, like the kid novels, where like each chapter, like the beginning of every chapter, the title page would have like a little illustration to go with the name of the chapter. And there's that in this book too, which I thought was really interesting. I can't remember if he did that in the Dark Tower series. Just to kind of give some background on like my experience with Stephen King. I've read a few of his works. I've read most of the Dark Tower series. I've read all the way up to the end of Song of Susanna, which I believe was the 6th one. I have not read The Dark Tower yet, the final one, but I plan on reading that at some point. I'm probably going to get that book sometime soon because I got a gift card for Barnes & Noble, so hot damn, I got to use that. But I've read that. I've read The Stand, which is a very good book. I've read It, phenomenal book. I love it. I've read bits and pieces of Cujo. I have not read The Green Mile. I need to because, well, it's like a short story in like, what's it called? The Four Seasons or Changing of the Seasons. It's like a short story in that book. I read most of The Shining when I was younger. I need to go back and finish that. And I also want to read Dr. Sleep because I've watched the movie, which I actually really enjoyed the movie. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of his. I've probably read, out of all the authors I've read, he's the one I probably read the most works of. So yeah, I do want to read more of his work for sure. If you guys have any suggestions, by the way, feel free to, share in the comments, on YouTube and stuff. If you just want to let me know, like, if there's any recommendations you have as far as like his books that you think that I would enjoy. One of my buddies told me, I think it's Eye of the Dragon is supposed to be really good. And it's another book kind of like Fairy Tale where it's like that, that mythical story sort of, but anyways, on this book, the illustrations I was talking about before were done by Gabriel Rodriguez and Nicholas Delort, and I really liked them. They're really good. They remind me kind of a little bit of kind of the sketches that I do sometimes, like those kind of heavy ink drawings. Of course, mine are a little bit more exaggerated and cartoony than what they do, but it's still really cool. I like the work they did with this novel. Apparently, the book is also in talks for a movie. Paul Greengrass is in talks to work on the film adaptation. This is the person that wrote the Jason Bourne series, or at least worked on the Jason Bourne movies, which is, I think this was announced like not too long after the book released last year. So that's kind of interesting that they're already, in talks for a movie. But I mean, it's Stephen King. The guy he writes a book and Hollywood pretty much is all over that in a heartbeat, which makes me a little nervous because Stephen King movies are kind of hit and miss, I've noticed. Like, the Dark Tower movie, I didn't see it, but I know people who have, and they said it was not good, which I was not surprised. Like, the Dark Tower is definitely one of those series that, like, I think it would work better as a show, maybe on HBO, not a movie. I don't know how you adapt that into a film. I don't think you can do it very smoothly, but, like, The Mist is good. Dr. Sleep, of course, is really good. The Shining, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of it. The TV series and the Stanley Kubrick film. So, whatever. The Stephen King adaptations are very hit and miss. So I'll be curious to see how this goes if they do go through with it. But anyways, to give a brief synopsis of the book follows the main character, Charlie Reed, who is a high school student and athlete, pretty much like a, straight-laced honor student, does sports, does like football and basketball and stuff like that. And pretty much has in the beginning, he has a pretty uninteresting, normal life. I believe the story takes place like in the 2010s or something like that, like the mid 2010s. And of course, before I go any further, as always, spoiler warning, it's going to be in the title, but if you haven't read this book, just consider this the heads up for you. But basically, the story follows Charlie Reed. It's like the summertime, and basically he discovers his neighborhood kind of cranky old man, Mr. Bowditch, who gets badly injured in an accident, and so Charlie essentially takes care of him, as well as Mr. Bowditch's dog, Radar, who's an elderly German shepherd that Charlie immediately becomes very attached to. As the story progresses, he, of course, develops a, kind of a grandpa, grandson relationship with Mr. Bowditch. The two become close, they become very good friends, and he spends a lot of time at his house. And then later on in the story, Charlie discovers that there's kind of a supernatural element going on with Mr. Bowditch's home. He discovers his shed seems to have something weird going on in there. He hears strange noises coming from his shed, but it's all bolted up so he can't get in there. And he keeps trying to get Mr. Bowditch to tell him about his past and where he came from, and also the mysterious wealth that he seems to have. It's revealed in the story that Mr. Bowditch has gold that seemingly has come out of nowhere, and Charlie can't seem to figure out where it came from and how he got it, as well as, of course, just I think there's other things around his home that he discovers that seems kind of out of this world too, as well as Mr. Bowditch himself is kind of a mysterious character. Then later in the story, it's revealed that the shed is actually a well that leads into another world, a fairy tale-like world, hence the title of the story. The world is called Empus, and at one point, this is kind of like about halfway through the story, I would say roughly, Charlie essentially goes on a journey into that world. The reason why is because he discovers there is a magic item in that world that could actually reverse the age of a person or an animal. He becomes very attached to Mr. Bowditch's dog, Radar, who is, kind of on her last few legs. She doesn't have much time left, and Charlie wants to take her to Empus to put her on I believe he's told it's a dial that can essentially reverse her age and make her young again. But of course, he goes there and he gets in all kinds of shenanigans, and there's a great big villain called the Flight Killer that basically wants to capture Charlie and kill him, essentially. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. That's just kind of the broad strokes of the story. So I'll kind of go into more of the details of it, at least some parts of the plot, here in a little bit. But that, in a sense, in a nutshell, is the story basically. I don't want to give away too much, and I'm not going to spoil the ending because I don't like doing that for books. And so if you want to know what happens as far as the ending goes, just either go check it out yourself or read the Wikipedia page. But before I go any further, I'll just say right now, yeah, I liked this book quite a bit. I haven't read a Stephen King book in a while, so this was very refreshing. I really did enjoy it too, and especially as far as fictional stories go, this is probably up there as one of my more favorites. It's different from what I'm used to Stephen King writing, for sure, especially coming off of reading the Dark Tower series. That was the last series that I had read from him. So going from that to this is definitely... It's lighter in tone in many ways than the Dark Tower series is, and it's also a lot more grounded too, even though it does still kind of deal with traveling to other worlds, kind of like what Roland does in Dark Tower. It's still pretty grounded. You really only, the main character Charlie really only spends his time either in his world or Empus. There's not a lot of jumping between multiple worlds, multiple universes. So in that sense, it feels a lot more grounded than the Dark Tower series. It's a little bit more simplistic. It's easier to kind of follow what's going on. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And if you like Stephen King, if you like his work, I definitely think that this is going to be something that you're going to enjoy a lot. But yeah, let's just kind of get into, I guess, some of the things that I liked about this book. First and foremost, I like the fictional fairy tale aspect of it. I like that the world that Charlie goes to, I love how Stephen King, he does a good job of making it seem like this fantastical, interesting universe. It has two moons. It has it feels like a lived-in world. It feels like he's kind of built this lore around it. Even though we don't get to see a whole lot of that, it does feel like he took a lot of time to really develop this world, which I know in in the I think near the end of the book, like after the story's over, I think he did describe like he gives credit to people who helped him kind of do research. I think on like fictional works, fictional writing for stories like this to kind of help him build the world. So like the world of Impus. So it definitely seems like he took a lot of time to really make sure that this felt like a place that could exist. And I think in that regard, he does a really good job of that. I actually like the characters in the story quite a bit too. There's a lot of really interesting and even kind of funny characters at times. Like the world that Charlie goes to, it's been cursed by the villain, the Flight Killer, and so he puts like this plague on these people that turns them. It makes them kind of slowly turn into like their skin starts turning gray and becomes moldy, and their faces like kind of flap over and stuff like that. And there's this character named Dora who Charlie befriends, who like she takes him in and she gives him food and shelter and stuff like that. But because of her deformity, she can't speak very well. So like Charlie has to kind of figure out how to communicate with her. And so there's like a lot of that in this story. Like I like her character. There's another character named Claudia who is like, she's deaf. She's had like her ears removed. So like she constantly screams at Charlie, and it's like she mispronounces his name too. And it's like the way Stephen King writes it, he adds this level of like levity to it that I really appreciate. That's one thing that I'll say about King is that I think he's really good at balancing like horror and comedy. Like he can take a story that can be really almost creepy and terrifying at moments and even make it kind of funny in the next moment. So I really appreciate that about him, and especially in this story, I think that is evident. And also kind of to go off that too, I like the scary moments in this story. There's a moment where Charlie, when he's taking the dog Radar, he takes her to the city where the dial is supposed to be to make her younger, and there's this big giant monster there, and he has to kind of sneak around it. And the way they build it up and the way Stephen King describes it, like I think he's definitely one of the masters at using descriptive language to really paint a picture for like what's going on. Like he does it in the book he does it in the Dark Tower series. And he does it again in this book too. Like the way he describes the creatures that Charlie encounters on his journey, it's like these are definitely some monsters you would not want to screw around with in real life. There's these creatures called it's called the Night Soldiers. They're basically like skeletons essentially. And so it's funny, like I don't know why, but for some reason in my mind I kept picturing the voice of Skeletor from like the old He-Man cartoon coming out of each of them whenever they would speak, like in the book. And I don't know why, it always made me chuckle whenever they would talk. So because I always just kept picturing that voice coming out of their mouths. So but yeah, like there's some really good tense moments in the book. Something else that Stephen King is really good at is he's really good at describing like injuries to characters. Like Charlie gets pretty banged up throughout the story, and just the way King describes it, like there's one injury he describes to Charlie kind of towards the end of the story that was just kind of like, it kind of had me sort of like wincing a little bit. Like I just kind of kept thinking like, geez, man, that sucks. But yeah, it was, I think that's a staple of Stephen King. He's really good at using descriptive language to paint a picture of his story. Like I feel like I always have a very clear idea of what's going on throughout the narrative. And I think he does that really well for the most part in this story too. Another aspect I really liked about this is like there's a really good family dynamic between Charlie and his father. And again, without going into that too much, Charlie has a pretty tragic background involving his mother, which is something that's really kind of not driven a wedge between him and his dad, but it's definitely made it's taking its toll in their relationship. And you see a lot of that in the story. And King really does a good job of building up in the beginning of the book, like Charlie's relationship with his dad, that even though it's strained, there's still this love between the two of them. And it makes his journey into Impus feel that much more dire, because you really care about Charlie and you care about his father. And these are two characters that you genuinely want to see reunited at the end of the story. That was something that really kind of kept in the back of my mind. I kept thinking like, man, I really hope Charlie gets through this so he can see his dad again. Like I don't want especially after everything that his dad goes through. Like we learn about the background of his dad and his bout with alcoholism, another staple of Stephen King. Stephen King books, they always got alcoholism in them. But yeah, like that was something that was always kind of in the back of my mind reading this story for sure. That's something else that I think Stephen King is really good at writing about, is like relationships. I think he's really good at writing characters and relationships that they have in the story. Like the relationship Charlie has with his father in this story feels real and genuine. The relationship that he has with Radar, even though she's a dog, it feels like, I feel like most dog owners, or really just people who have pets, can relate to that. Like that feeling of like, especially when your pet is getting older and you feel kind of helpless and you want to do anything you can to help them, but you know that you can't, But what if you suddenly had the ability to do that, Like, how many people would say that they wouldn't really go through with it? I mean, I don't know if I'd go through the shit that Charlie goes through in this book to save my dog if I had one, but, it's something to think about. I feel like if I ran into even one of the things that Charlie encounters in this, I'd be like, yeah, screw this. I'm going home. I'm going back to my world. But yeah, I think Stephen King does a really good job with writing characters, with developing their relationships, and really just making you believe that these are real people in the story. They don't feel like just, like blank slates. They feel like genuine people, for the most part. So, and all the characters in the story too, like I said, there's other characters in the story that I really like. I like Leah, the princess that Charlie meets in the story. Her character is really interesting. The way she uses kind of ventriloquism to speak through a horse to communicate with people. That was a cool little detail that King added into there. The only thing I would say about the world of Impus itself is that I really wish that we could have gotten more time to really explore that world. It takes up half of the book, but the thing is, a lot of the second half takes place in kind of one location within that magical world. And it would have been cool, because it just feels like Stephen King really took some time to build this world up and put a lot of thought into it. It would have been nice if we as readers could have gotten to see more of it. Maybe he'll do that if there's going to be a sequel or future entries in this story, but that was something that I would have liked to have seen more of. As far as negatives go for this book, I don't really have a whole lot. I will say one thing. Charlie Reed as a main character, he's not incredibly interesting. He's not a bad character by any means, but the whole story is told through first person from his perspective. So, the thing about that is, like, he's not... he's fine as a character, and he even has some good comical moments in the story, but he kind of feels like an everyman. And I guess that probably was by design. King probably meant him as more of just sort of a vessel for the audience or the reader to kind of experience the world through, which, that's fine. I didn't have a problem with it. And it's not like every main character has to be this intricate, person with a lot of depth to them. But when you come off of reading a book like the Dark Tower series with Roland, who I think is a phenomenal character, Charlie definitely feels like a bit of a step down. But then again, he's supposed to be a regular high school kid, so I guess I can kind of understand that too. He is also kind of a badass in the story. The dude messes shit up. Like, he gets into some brawls in this story and just whoops ass, which I gotta give him credit for that. It's like, okay, Charlie can handle himself. He can hold his own. This kid's got moxie. As far as the other negatives, I actually kind of wish that this was made into 2 books instead of 1. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is it really feels like 2 separate stories. The first half is really kind of about Charlie meeting Mr. Bowditch and his dog and their relationship as they spend the summer together, because Charlie's taking care of Mr. Bowditch after his injury, so he can't really do a whole lot. And so, like, we see, like, the impact that has on Charlie with his school life, with his athletics, like, he has to drop off the football team and the basketball team. We see the impact that has with him and his father. Not that it has a negative impact or anything like that, but just we see how that affects his family dynamic and just his life in general. And that part's really interesting, but that's like the first half of the book. And then the second half really completely shifts and goes into the other world, into the Impus world, where Charlie has to, go on his little adventure to save Radar. And it really does kind of feel like 2 completely different stories. I remember at one point when I was about 75% of the way through, I kind of found myself thinking, like, wow, this really doesn't feel like I'm reading the same book from where I started. And I just kept thinking that. So yeah, I almost kind of wonder if this wouldn't have benefited from being 2 separate stories. Maybe like the first book could have been Charlie meeting Bowditch, but then again, I don't know if you could have made that interesting for an entire book. So I don't know. this coming from a guy who has no experience writing books whatsoever. So yeah, I'm sitting here like acting like, yeah, this is what Stephen King should have done. Like, listen to me, Stephen. I'm some guy from Kansas City who has literally never had anything published in his life. You need to listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah, if Stephen King ever actually listens to this podcast, I'm sure he'll just laugh. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why I feel that way is because I guess I really enjoyed this story and I wanted to spend more time with these characters and in this world, both worlds really, that I think just having two different stories or books would have been nice. I think it would have served the story a little bit in that regard. Plus, maybe it would have given King more time to develop the other world a bit more. Maybe we could have been introduced to more of the lore, more of the backstory and the history of it. It's kind of like the Chronicles of Narnia books. Because there's 7 books, we get more time to see Narnia, the world, develop. Because each book takes place over centuries, like hundreds or even thousands of years. So we kind of see how the change in time has affected Narnia and how the not just the world and the people have changed, but things like their politics, war, things like that, how that's developed throughout the years. So yeah, I don't know. I wanted to see more of this world. Whenever I read books like this, like fiction books, like in these magical worlds, I always want to learn as much about them as I can. That's just kind of how I am as a reader. Another thing that I would say is the ending of the book does feel a little rushed. Again, not without going into it too much. The final confrontation they have with the big villain is, I mean, it's done well. It's definitely interesting. It's just, I would have liked if we could have gotten a little bit more out of it. And not only that, but even the final resolution, after the big fight, and kind of how the characters all, how they go back to their regular lives. That felt a little bit rushed too. I would have liked to have gotten more of that, the impact that this has on all the characters, including Charlie. How does this change them? How does this impact their lives? We just get a small, a glimpse of it, but we don't really get a whole lot of details. So I would have liked more of that. So again, maybe having it split into 2 separate stories, maybe that would have helped in that regard. Hard to say, but as it stands, I mean, as one story, as one solid narrative, I think King does a phenomenal job tying it all together for the most part. And I think it speaks to his skills as a writer, that even when the material feels a little bit rushed or there could have been more of it, it still works. I still enjoyed it. But yeah, I mean, that's, and to be perfectly fair, I mean, I guess you could make that argument for a lot of his other works too. I always kind of felt like the big confrontation against Pennywise at the end of it, not rushed necessarily, but it was definitely strange. And I remember always kind of thinking after all the characters go through, I don't really remember there's a scene where they talk about it that much. Granted, I think they lose their memories afterwards, but I just remember thinking man, if I just fought this giant intergalactic spider, I would be okay, guys, we gotta talk. We just went through some shit. But anyways, yeah, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, on the whole, I really enjoyed this book. It felt like a good return to one of my favorite authors. I've always been a huge Stephen King fan for many, many years. And, I was very pleasantly surprised by this. Again, especially like I said, this was something that I just kind of discovered by accident. So it was a good discovery for sure. Yeah, if you are a Stephen King fan, I definitely think that there's something here for you. If you like fictional stories, if you like stories kind of similar to what you would see from something like the Chronicles of Narnia, that kind of story, the magical other worlds, this is definitely going to have something for you too. Definitely kind of more on the adult side, of course. There is a fair amount of bad language. I can't remember how many times he drops the F-bomb in this, but I feel like it's in there at least a few times. Not a lot, though. I mean, I think it's used pretty sparingly. Kind of like an R-rated movie. What do they get 2 F-bombs and then they're R-rated or something? It's I think it's PG-13 with 1 or 2 F-bombs, and I think after that, any more than that, it's you're R-rated. So this is kind of right on the cusp of that. Well, no, this would be an R-rated movie probably. If for no other reason, I think some of the gory, violent scenes probably would be a little bit too much for kids. That's why I'm really excited to see this made into a movie. I really want to see Hollywood's interpretation of some of the stuff that happens in this movie. Oh wait, maybe I don't. Hollywood, they have a bad habit of screwing up stuff like this. I'll keep an eye out. But yeah, this gets a pretty glowing recommendation from me. If you, like I said, if you like Stephen King, and of course if you're looking for a book to kind of keep you busy for a while, this is definitely something that I think is worth checking out. All right, everybody, I think that's going to conclude this episode. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. If you like what you heard tonight, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.